Hello. Before the podcast starts, I wanted to say a big thank you to everyone who has been listening this year. Thank you to all the guests I've had on the podcast, and thanks for sharing your stories. It means a lot. We've covered so many topics this year: anorexia, alcohol, youth suicide. There's just too many to mention, but thank you so much to all those guests who have come on, and thank you to everyone who's listened. It's been really good to progress this year and have such a big audience, and to really enjoy bringing you some great guests, great podcasts, and thank you to everybody who sent emails and messages and following me on Instagram. When we share our stories, we help each other learn, and that's a great thing. So every time I do a podcast, I'm hoping that there's something that you take away from that makes you feel a little bit better about yourself or a different way of thinking. Please remember to subscribe to the podcast and tell your friends how good it is. You can contact me through the website, lifechangesyou.com.au, or at Instagram on life_changesyou_podcast. And on Instagram, you'll get daily updates that are positive. Lots of people are following on there, over 100,000. So now I'm taking a break now until January 23rd, when a new year of amazing guests will start. There are so many good podcasts coming in January. There's one about a cult that was around in Australia about 20 years ago. There's also the Child Resource Coalition, which helps track down predators and saves children. So that's a really important one to listen to. Also, Chad's coming back and Gareth is coming back. And there's Soul Healers coming back. There's a lot of people who have been on this year who you've really liked, and they're all coming back early next year. So anyway, until I come back on the 23rd with a new year of podcasts, take care of each other and yourselves. Enjoy the time away. I might play some repeats over the holiday period, so keep an eye out. Otherwise, I'll see you back on January 23rd. So now, enjoy the next podcast. This is the last one for this year, and it's with Isaac, who has been quite a fan favourite. Hello and welcome to Life Changes You. My name's Daniel. I hope you've had a great week. Lots of things happening around the world, and lots of things happening on the podcast. Lots of people following, lots of people enjoying it. If you have enjoyed the podcast, please tell your friends about it. Please subscribe. Leave me a review. That would be fantastic. I don't know where you're listening. If you're listening on Apple, leave a review. If you're listening on Google, a review. If you're listening on Spotify, a review. Wherever you're listening, because we're everywhere at the moment. Look, we had Isaac Lee here quite a while ago. I think it's about 4 or 5 weeks ago. And we spoke about narcissistic personality disorder. And today he's back. And today we're going to talk about borderline personality disorder. And so welcome, Isaac Lee. Isaac, not Isaac Lee, just Isaac.
Yeah, well, you can call me Isaac Lee if you want to. I don't mind.
That's all right. Yep. So you've been keeping well?
Yeah, I've been keeping well. So let's talk a little bit about BPD, borderline personality disorder.
Okay, so give us an overview of what it's about.
Wow.
Am I right in saying that borderline personality disorder is more geared towards females, or is it equal in men as well?
Yeah, well, it's more highly diagnosed in women.
Right.
And you've got an increased probability of being diagnosed with it if your mother has BPD. Okay. So if you are female and your mum has BPD, then you've got an increased probability of having those criteria.
Right.
Although there's some debate about whether we should even have borderline personality disorder as a diagnosis at all. There is certainly a contingent of people that believe that it is probably better to just refer to it as complex trauma.
Right.
With, certain traits. When it comes to like a diagnosis of BPD or a diagnosis in general, there are some benefits to diagnosing in terms of just having some clarity. Yeah. But there's a couple of big reasons why I diagnose people. First one is funding. So in the States, you can't have, your insurance isn't going to pay out for anything unless there's a diagnosis attached to it.
Yeah.
So that's the number one reason why the DSM actually first came out was actually linked with insurance. In Australia, like our Medicare system, typically we have to have a diagnosis that we're working towards because what we really want to do is we want to look at the traits of an individual that an individual has, how they're presenting, and then be able to say, well, which intervention is the right one to do? Should we be doing CBT? Should we be doing ACT? Should we be doing empathic confrontation? Should we be, doing hypnosis or hypnotherapy? Like what are the things that we should be doing? And then based on the actual diagnosis, then we're going to be informed of the treatment that is appropriate.
Yep.
We're going to be caught away. We're talking about borderline, and now we're going to talk about diagnosis again and why we even do it. So when it comes to BPD and a diagnosis, there are some really beneficial things in terms of having a bit more clarity, having a bit more understanding, being able to express what's going on for you to other people and shortcut some information. But there's also some downsides in that people tend to make some snap judgments when it comes to BPD. You've got borderline. Well, I've had clients that have a diagnosis of borderline on their file and they've gone into the emergency room with something that really requires urgent attention. Yeah. And the nurse has seen BPD at the front of the chart and has just said, yeah, you can sit down and wait for 6 hours. And no one's going to talk to you because they think that this person's got borderline, so their complaint isn't real. Yeah. Or they've got borderline and there's nothing we can do about it, so we're just not even going to try to help. And so there has been some downsides. Most of my clients that come in with a diagnosis of BPD have some pretty horrific stories about interacting with the medical profession. Yeah. And it's something that I think that we all actually need to do a better job of in terms of having a better understanding of BPD, what it works. There's certainly some things that we can do that improve functioning, improve our ability to regulate, improve relationships. And so, there are some excellent interventions out there. And I just wanted to kind of preface that with, hang on a second, right? We can do some stuff, right? Well, there is some good stuff out there when it comes to BPD. And this is before we even get into what BPD is and how it actually applies. I'm mindful that I talk heaps, right? So jump in.
No, because look, I mean, I've learned these things, but I haven't learned them to the extent that you've learned them. So my knowledge is is usually somewhat lesser to you. So I have a general knowledge on a lot of different subjects. And that's why I get you guys to come on who are the experts and people to tell me what topic they want to talk about, because then I can listen to that and I can grab questions as we're going. So I just feel that's better for the people listening at home. It's as though we're all learning together. Rather than me have a stock standard list of questions and I go, okay, Isaac, can you tell me why this happens in borderline personality disorder? Yeah. So proceed.
Cool. All right. Well, let's break down the different criteria. Okay. Yeah. So a pervasive pattern of instability of interpersonal relationships, self-image and affect, adds marked impulsivity beginning by early adulthood and present in a variety of contexts, as indicated by 5 or more of the following 9. So there are 9 different criteria. If we tick off 5 of them, then you might meet the criteria for a diagnosis of BPD. Now, when you've got any 5 of these 9 lead to a diagnosis, that's a lot of different combinations. So in terms of presentation of borderline, you might get the diagnosis and you might have 10 people in the room that have the same diagnosis, but not one of them have the exact same 5.
Wow. I didn't realize that. So there's 5 traits out of the 10 traits, did you say?
5 out of 9.
5 out of 9. So, and if you had 10 people in a room, they could all have different parts of those traits and none of them display the same way.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah. It's actually a pretty large number
That's a lot of different combinations of things that people
could have. Lots of different combinations. Yeah.
And all of that just fits under the one umbrella of...
Yeah, that's why I say that there are some issues with the diagnosis of BPD, and it might be more appropriate to say that it's complex trauma with a certain number of presentations. Yeah. But we do find it easy to make this diagnosis in order to convey some information pretty quickly, or to work out what kind of things that we, as psychs or as therapists, to be aware of in terms of different interventions.
Yeah.
So it shortcuts a bunch of information, but also there are some there are some issues with making assumptions based on just purely.
What were some of the traits?
All right, let's go through them. First one, frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment. So they go to just some pretty extreme efforts to not feel abandoned. Now, this might be calling an excessive amount of times to find out what's going on. You're nodding your head there. Like, oh, yeah.
Look, before we started this, I'll just let the listeners at home into this. I did have a girlfriend when I was in my 20s who had borderline personality disorder. And the hardest thing I found, and I was just saying to Isaac, was that if she texted me or called me and I didn't get back to her within about 20 seconds, the world was ending. And look, that might not be the same for everybody, but it was obsessive. And I would get 10, 20 calls, and then her mum would call me to see why I wasn't calling her back. And I'd say, look, I'm at work. I can't call back now. So that's why when Isaac just said that, I was nodding my head, because I remember the amount of phone calls I would get in half an hour.
Yeah, so it's a real frantic effort
to
avoid that real or imagined abandonment. It's certainly a key characteristic that we see. All right, I'm going to run through these and then we'll kind of discuss holistically what it's about. All right. So a pervasive pattern of unstable and intense interpersonal relationships characterized by alternating between extremes of idealization and devaluation. All right, let's translate that. This person in my life, they're the best ever. They're such an amazing friend. I can't believe how great they are. Right? Like, this person is so amazing, and hang out with them on the weekend and hang out with them every night. They're the best. Next week, they're the worst. I can't believe that they're the person
that was the other thing that happened. Yeah.
Yeah. So extremes of idealization and devaluation.
Yeah.
So basically putting people on a pedestal, and then when they come off that pedestal, then they're the worst ever. So either they're the best or the worst. I like to point this out to people because it's something that we all kind of tend to do in different ways. So if you're at a footy match, right, you might say, oh yeah, my team is the best and the other team is the worst.
Yeah.
So it's something that we all kind of tend to do in different ways. We have some dichotomous thinking, which is a characteristic of BPD. So black and white, either one or the other.
Yeah.
And we make some snap judgments in different kind of situations. It's just that they can be pretty extreme with people with borderline personality disorder, or people with these kind of characteristics are just saying, okay, yeah, this is something that you do in a variety of contexts that is having a potentially a negative impact on your life or negative impact on your relationships. Let's run through these. Identity disturbance, marked and persistently unstable self-image or sense of self. So just difficulties with like, am I somebody that likes this particular thing, or am I a nerd, or am I like a jock? Like, what is going on in terms of like an unstable sense of self? So maybe when they're hanging out with certain people, then they take on those characteristics of that group to a point where they just don't feel comfortable in themselves. Impulsivity. Number 4 is impulsivity in at least 2 areas that are potentially self-damaging. For example, spending, sex, substance abuse, reckless driving, binge eating. So impulsivity.
Yeah.
I feel like doing something, suddenly they're doing that thing, even though they haven't really thought out the consequences of that.
Yeah.
So just an increased probability of that happening. Number 5, recurrent suicidal behavior, gestures or threats, or self-mutilating behavior. So increased threats of suicide, increase, I'm going to kill myself, or increased probability of engaging in suicidal behavior. So they're more likely to find themselves in positions where they're threatening to kill themselves or have done something that might result in death.
And what trait are we up to now? Are we up to number 5?
Number 5, yeah.
Because if you had those 5 traits, I mean, they're 5 pretty amazing things to have in having to deal with it. Like I can't imagine having those 5 things running around in my head and having to try and deal with that on a daily basis.
Super difficult.
Yeah.
And because of these extremes that happen, so frantic efforts to avoid that abandonment means that you do call that person 20 times.
Yeah.
And guess what? When you call somebody 20 times, there's a higher probability of them actually abandoning you because that's excessive.
Or even if they don't abandon you, just like going, I'm not talking to this person for the rest of the day.
Yeah. So like they often create these self-fulfilling prophecies as a result of their behavior. I fear that this person is going to leave me, so I'm going to do all these things to make sure that they leave me. Or I feel like they're going to leave me. I don't want to feel like I'm going to be abandoned, so guess what? I'm going to abandon them first.
Yeah.
This is this unstable and intense interpersonal relationships.
Yeah. All right, give us the next 4.
Okay. Number 6, affective instability due to marked reactivity of mood. So the degree to which they would get upset with something is just maybe disproportionate. The example that I often give to people is, okay, let's say that you're at work, right? And you brought a packet of chips in for your lunch, right? And you put the packet of chips on top of the fridge. You're going to eat it for lunch. And you come in at your lunch break and someone's eating your packet of chips. You're going to be pretty upset, pretty annoyed.
Yep.
You might even complain about it and go, oh, who stole my chips?
Yeah.
Potentially somebody with borderline personality disorder, if they have that disproportionate response, they might come in and say that somebody's taken their packet of chips and it's like somebody's stolen their car. Right? So the intensity of that, you caused this massive disturbance to my life. You've taken thousands of dollars from me. Now I can't do the things that I want to do. How am I going to get home? This is a real problem. I need to solve this problem because it's going to really negatively impact my life. And so I'm going to now go to every single desk and find out who stole my chips.
Yeah.
I'm going to demand, I'm going to send out a company-wide email that says I'm quitting because somebody stole my chips. So, they end up resigning from their job. They, and that causes some significant impact on their ability to pay rent. And so we see this kind of play out in some pretty negative ways because of the impulsivity mixed with that emotional dysregulation.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to come back to that one because I think it's super important. 7, chronic feelings of emptiness. 8 is inappropriate, intense anger or difficulty controlling anger. You're going to mix that with the affective instability and the intense interpersonal relationships. You can see how that can be an interesting cocktail. And then 9 is transient stress-related paranoid ideation or severe dissociative symptoms. You'll translate that one. So combined with that frantic efforts to avoid real imagined abandonment, so paranoid ideation, like paranoid about the situation, paranoid about people leaving them, or just getting into their head something that's not true, but feels very true. And then we might combine that with a significant amount of stress and dissociative symptoms. So that's when they kind of zone out. They're just like, nah, all of this stuff is too much. I'm not really going to be here. I'm not going to really be present. And so, when that happens, it's kind of like they're there, but they're not there. It's like it's often described as, it's like I'm there, but I'm not in control of my body. It's like me watching myself in that situation.
So before you said that for this sort of diagnosis, you had to have 5 of the 9 traits. Is there people that have all 9 traits?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, typically, a lot of the times the people that I see, either 8 or 9.
Wow.
So there's a lot of 8.
That's quite a heavy load, isn't it, for someone to carry and to maneuver through life with?
Yeah, it can be really difficult because, you're worried about abandonment.
Yeah.
Constantly, but then you also have this affective instability, so you get really upset, you have difficulty controlling your anger, and then you've got this risk-taking behavior, so you end up very easily destroying friendships because of something that's happened where somebody's eaten some of your chips without asking, or maybe somebody didn't answer the phone, or maybe you asked somebody to come to the movies and they said yes, but then they have to cancel.
So you've got all these different traits, and that's without having any impact from the environment around you or family life contributing to what you're already dealing with.
Yeah. So typically, if we're going to come down to complex trauma, as I mentioned at the start, one of the reasons why there's some advocacy for the label of complex trauma is that typically the childhood of people with BPD can be met with a lot of instability.
Yeah.
So maybe your mum has BPD, or maybe you experienced a lot of trauma when you were a kid in terms of the people that were looking after you. Maybe you were abandoned when you were young. Maybe you had a parent pass away. Maybe you experienced abuse in one way, shape, or form. And so these different experiences, like when you've got somebody who literally has been abandoned by their caregiver, by their person that's meant to love, care, and support them, then when they find themselves in a position where somebody is being loving, caring, and supporting, freaks them the fuck out.
Yeah.
Right? You're going to leave me just like mum did.
Yeah.
You're going to leave me just like I was left when I was a kid. And so when that happens, then in a defense mechanism, they might dissolve that situation. They might avoid that abandonment by abandoning that person. They might avoid feeling vulnerable by making sure that they're always in control of the situation. And as soon as they feel loved, cared, or supported for, that's when we might see some instability. Not all the time, but this is something that does happen. With different people. So borderline can be pretty intense for the individual and for the people around them, because they tend to be quite empathic, right? So people with borderline, they tend to be quite aware of other people. And so when these triggers aren't happening, they're great. They can be excellent friends. They go to, they got a lot of effort to make sure that they're not abandoned, which often turns them into very good friends in terms of maybe a bit excessive sometimes. But they can be excellent people, right? Some of my favorite people, both in my personal life and, my clients would have this diagnosis of BPD. So there's a lot of positive stuff there. It's just that when these things get triggered, when these things happen, then it can be difficult for the people around them. It can be really difficult for that individual as well.
And how many, what are the statistics of people having borderline personality disorder? Is it high in the community, or is it something that's here and there?
Dan, I'm really hoping that this is a setup question where you're asking the question because you have the answer, because I don't have the answer to this one, mate. So go on, educate me, mate. What's happening?
Okay, well, I'll give them to you. So it's between 1% and 4% of the population are affected by BPD at some time in life. Late adolescence or early adulthood is when symptoms usually first appear. Women are more likely to be diagnosed. BPD's causes are not yet fully understood, but are likely to be a combination of biological and life factors. Most people with BPD recover after diagnosis and effective treatment, which, as we said, I think in the narcissistic podcast we did the other month, it's not so much recovering. I think it's more learning to live with the symptoms and the diagnosis you've got, and being able to evaluate yourself and be able to manage them rather than recovering. I've said this a lot of times before with social anxiety disorder. To me, social anxiety disorder is not a disorder, because we all have some form of social anxiety. I know if I'm going out for dinner with someone, I will probably text them before I go in the restaurant and say, hey, are you here yet? And if they say no, I might hang outside for a little bit until they turn up, or they say, I'm a minute away, then I'll go and grab the table, because I don't like sitting in a restaurant on my own at a table. Mm-hmm. Now, some people would say, well, that's social anxiety disorder because you don't feel comfortable sitting on your own. I see it as, look, I just don't want to sit on a table on my own. So I have a real problem with social anxiety disorder of where it actually is. I know there are some people with extreme social anxiety disorder, but I also think it's been put into an umbrella term so that we all have anxiety. And that's okay, because we all have a minimal or a lot bigger, whatever type of anxiety you have, it's okay.
Yeah, anxiety is great. We all need to have some amount of anxiety. Otherwise, we'd be in a lot of strife.
And I thought you were just about to go into your saber-toothed tiger story.
This podcast is not long enough. You'll have me trapped in forever. I'm going to bring it back to this borderline in terms of actually dealing with this. Effective treatment. Excellent. Age is another way that, just the number of years people, even without treatment, will actually learn to have their own coping strategies. And so we see a reduction in the intensity that just happens with age.
Yeah.
That being said, actually going to therapy and learning some emotional regulation techniques is probably the number one thing that I would suggest for people. Because of the intensity of the feelings that they have. So that feeling of abandonment or that feeling of anger or that feeling of frustration, because of the intensity that's going on there, that's when we see maybe some reckless behavior. So learning to be able to regulate your emotional state is just so important.
Yeah.
And we can do some simple ones like some breathing techniques, noticing how many things are in the room, being able to name things, a lot of dialectical behavior therapy techniques.
What is dialectical therapy?
Dialectical behavior therapy, DBT. It is a wave of cognitive behavior therapy under that big umbrella. It looks particularly at emotional regulation.
Yep.
And really, it was actually designed by Marsha Linehan as a treatment for BPD because she found that a lot of BPD people were actually dropping out of therapy very early.
Yeah.
And that was typically because we do a cognitive technique and we say, hey, you want to think about this differently. Well, then they go, you're trying to tell me that I'm wrong, that my way of thinking is wrong. Screw you, I'm out of here. Do we have time to quickly go through some communication techniques with people with borderline personality disorder? Dan?
How much time would you like?
Maybe I'll try to run through it in 5 minutes. What do you reckon?
5 minutes is brilliant. 6 at the most.
6 at the most. All right, cool. So I want to tell somebody about set communication. This is something that I use in my personal life as well as my professional life. I teach people about this. I try to get my partner to use this. I try to use it myself with people. And I use it with particularly with borderline, but also just in any relationship. I think it's super important. So even if you don't have BPD or you don't interact with people with BPD, I think this is something that try this skill. It's a good one.
All
right. So set communication. The S stands for supportive. The E stands for empathic. And then the T stands for truth. So we really want to get to the truth statement. So the truth statement might be, you calling me 20 times is inappropriate, right?
Yeah.
Now, if you've got somebody that is quick to be emotionally dysregulated or quick to feelings of abandonment, then trying to tell somebody that you shouldn't call me 20 times is likely to trigger some of these insecurities or these dysregulations. So what we want to do is we want to try to navigate around that by starting with a supportive statement, then an empathic statement, and then we go to the truth. So the supportive statement is an I statement, and it is really communicating how much you care about this person. So Dan, I want to tell you, I really care about you. I think that you're a great friend. You're a great person to hang out with. And it's really, I just want to tell you how much I care about what you think of me and our relationship, because it's something that's important to me in my life. So it's an I statement. Yeah. Then we'll go to an empathic statement. So the empathic statement is a you statement. So I would then say, I know that, you've been really stressed out with everything that's been happening. And when you've messaged me and I haven't messaged back, it's really stressful for you. And I get that, it makes you feel like I haven't been caring about you or I haven't been listening to you. And so that must be incredibly stressful for you to live with that, situation. I just want to let you know that, I certainly acknowledge and understand that. Then we get to the truth statement. But I also want to mention that when you call me that many times when I'm at work or have this expectation, it actually makes me feel like, you don't trust me, and it makes me feel like I'm in this bad position. I think that it would be good if we can maybe stop this or just reduce it some amount, just so that I feel a little bit better about the situation and we can, we can get through this together. Easier said by somebody who has practiced it a lot than done. So what I stress to people when you're learning set communications is practice.
Yeah.
I actually get people to write it down, because we want to jump straight to that truth statement, right? We want to tell them, boy, you messaged me 20 times. It's bloody ridiculous. Knock it off, right? And that might be true. But when you've got somebody with BPD, if they feel like, hey, you don't care about me, then they're going to reject whatever it is that you're saying. If you've got somebody with BPD and they feel like you don't understand me, then they're going to reject the truth statement that you're saying. So if we can navigate through that by starting with a supportive statement to really communicate, hey, I actually really do care about you. And then we jump into an empathic statement, I really do understand what you're experiencing, and that must be really difficult. And then we get to the truth statement, means that we're going to have that increased probability.
Yeah, no, that's really good because, and I can see it from, with the truth statement. Yeah, people would go, oh, look, I'm just over this, stop calling me. But when you put it in the two other terms, first of supportive and then empathic, it changes the flow. It acknowledges yourself, it acknowledges them, and then you're still getting to the truth, but in a way that is more easily digestible, I guess. And it's not so confrontational.
I certainly think that this is super important with borderline, but I actually just use this in a bunch of my relationships, both friends and family members, with my partner, because it's super nice. Like when you want to tell somebody something that you would like them to change, to just communicate, hey, I just really care about you, and I understand that it's stressful for you at the moment, and if you can do this thing for me, that'd be great. Next
time I'm chatting to you, if I hear you say, look, I really care about you, and I understand, I'm going to go, right, I know what he's talking about now.
All right, what's that truth statement?
It's coming, I know it's on its way.
Yeah. It's really cool. Like, particularly with a lot of my couples work, we use this set communication. And I actually have a little sheet that I hand out to people where it's just the SET, supportive statement, an example. And I get them to write it down. So we actually practice writing it down before you actually go to them. So the truth statement might be, I would like you to do more vacuuming. So supportive statement, I really care about you. Like I really like how much work you do around the house. Empathic statement, it must be really stressful with work and everything going on at the moment. Truth statement, it would be really nice if you did the vacuuming, or it would be really nice if you took out the trash. Rather than, take out the trash. Because then, you don't really care about me. You don't understand what I'm going through. I'm not going to take out the trash. You can take out the trash. So like if we can kind of navigate around those, like we all have these borderline traits in different situations. And, like we all want to feel like people care about us and that they understand us. And so set communication is a great
Beautiful.
technique.
Look, you've explained borderline personality disorder so well this week, and it's been good to have another conversation with you. It's great to get some clarity on these things because, as I said to you before we started with the last one we did about a month ago, I think these are important because a lot of people in the community have heard of these things, but they don't actually understand what they are or why they're important to understand or what the ramifications are for that person so that we can be more compassionate and more empathetic towards people when we hear, I've got borderline personality disorder or I don't know about narcissistic personality disorder. I don't know if you need to be more empathetic towards people there, whether you need to, refer them on to someone. But it's good for everybody to understand that these mental health issues are not easy for the person, but with a little bit of empathy from us, it can make a huge difference to them. I mean, you've seen my stuff out there on social media. It's all about stop the stigma. Let's learn to work together. Let's learn to not have the stigma of mental health because mental health is the same as physical health. If we look at it all the same, then we don't fear it. We just work with it and we adapt and it becomes the normal thing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Increase empathy and compassion. They're the two words I love. I'd love everybody to use them every day. Empathy and compassion, and we'll go a long way. Thank you so much, Isaac. Another great podcast. I don't know what we'll come up with next time, but you always come up with some good ideas and things that I'm interested in.
No, thanks for having me. It's something that I'm really passionate about. Borderline personality disorder and just personality disorders in general, and helping people obviously. But I want to say thank you to you for having me on the podcast and giving me the opportunity to share this information with people. And I also want to say thank you to the listeners because this is something that I think it's just super important for the world to have more information about. And so, we've got these people listening to this podcast, wanting to know more information about it, wanting to know better ways to help people around them or better ways that they can interact with other people. And it just shows people caring about these things and trying to make the world a better place. And that's awesome. So thanks very much for listening.
That's
and
brilliant,
trying to make
Isaac.
the world a better place.
I think the more people that listen, and I think I think the conversations I try and have with people, I don't like to have it in a clinical sort of setting or Is it vocabulary? I like to have it more normalized as possible so more people can understand it, more people can take something from it. And I think with you always put it in a way that is easily absorbed because it's funny, it's informative. And you're the sort of people I like having on here because you make it easy for everybody to understand. I think what I was going to start with, which I forgot, was I think up until I'd say the last 10, 20 years ago, psychology, psychiatry, counselling was all seemed to be sort of cloaked and you didn't learn much about it unless you read a self-help book. You might have a bit in it unless you bought a psychology book. What I want from this is that everybody gets the information, everybody understands it, and then it becomes normal. Great to have you on again. We will catch up again, I guess, in another few months, and we'll look at some new topics then.
Sounds good.
See you soon. Well, that was another episode of Life Changes You. If you want to contact us, we're available on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And we also have a website, lifechangesyou.com.au. So until next time, take care of each other, and thanks for listening.